Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is 2 p.m. and we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. And if you are returning, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the second webinar in the 7-part series entitled Understanding Trauma, Unpacking a Culturally Responsive Approach to Serving Sexual Assault Survivors During COVID-19. My name is Erica Blackwood, and I am the SADI specialist for NC CASA. This series will provide training and practical applications for supporting survivors of sexual violence in the midst of dual pandemics of COVID-19 and the civil unrest. It will focus on helping advocates create accessible, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed approaches to the unique needs of survivors that are faced with during this time. Included in this webinar is foundational information about the intersections of trauma and sexual violence, historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, and racialized trauma. So before we get started with today's webinar, Trauma in the Brain, just a few housekeeping items. All webinars will be on NC CASA's YouTube page afterwards. Certificates will be available at the end of the series, and our training specialist, Gabriella Nyman, will be handling distribution. She has put a link in the chat for you to go ahead and fill that out if you are indeed seeking a certificate. And if you have questions, you can use the chat box to ask a question privately to panelists or use the Q&A feature. For now, please make sure you have your responses set to all panelists and attendees as we do introductions and opening check-ins. We are moving into more difficult and heavy discussion topics, so please be mindful of taking care of yourself first. If you have already seen the first webinar on grounding in humanity, use some of the things that you learn there to stay grounded as we continue to move forward. If you need to step away or you need additional assistance, you can message the panelists privately. And so now I would like to turn it over and I introduce you to the host of today's webinar, Amanda Gopal. Amanda?
Hi, thanks everyone. It is great to be with you this afternoon, even virtually. I wish we could do these in person because I like being in a room with everyone and sharing the same space, but we are making the best of it, aren't we? And I think and believe and hope that our time this afternoon will still be valuable, even though we don't see each other's faces. And yeah, I'm hoping to share some with you about one of my favorite subjects. I love learning about and thinking about how our brains respond to trauma. It is fascinating to me. And so I'm hoping just to share a little bit with you this afternoon about what I have learned in my work with survivors of sexual assault. A little background on me, I am a licensed clinical social worker, so I come from a therapeutic background. I provide therapy to victims of sexual assault, people who have PTSD, and specifically with those who are victims of sex trafficking. That is a niche that I have developed as well. But in my work with survivors, I have been just remarkably humbled and impressed by the strength that they have and the ways that they are moving through and being resilient and healing from the trauma that they have experienced. So hoping to share some of their stories with you today, a little bit of what I have learned from them. Here's kind of where we're going at a quick glance. I'm kind of approaching this with the basic assumption that everybody has a basic understanding of trauma. And so we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about what complex trauma looks like and and what some of the effects of it are. And then looking specifically at how this affects the brain, we're going to look at a couple different brain structures and components, and specifically a big influencing factor is what I call the alarm system in the brain. So we're going to talk extensively about that today. We're going to talk some about how trauma affects memory, because it does have an impact on that as well. And really we're looking at this, the whole reason we're doing, this entire series is really learning as much as we can about trauma in order to effectively serve the survivors that we're working with. Depending on, they may have experienced lots of different kinds of trauma, and we are wanting to improve our efforts and always be working towards providing services through a trauma-informed lens and in ways that are sensitive to the needs of trauma survivors. I'm really glad Erica mentioned and just made the reminder to just practice some self-care today. I will be sharing some stories or examples of some of the people that I have worked with, and I will not do that in any sort of graphic detail, but I just know that some of the things that we're talking about are heavier, and they can be triggering to people, just the topic of trauma, because I am also making some assumptions at assuming that many of us on this webinar have our own histories of trauma. And so I think it's important to stay grounded and utilize some of the self-care resources. And if you need to step away, then that's fine as well. I will be sending out after this is, after the webinar is complete, Gabriella will be sending out a copy of this PowerPoint presentation so that you can have the slides to refer back to. And I have a handout as well that will go with that. So just to answer that question right up front, I will be sending out the PowerPoint so that you'll have that to refer back to. And I do see the chat box as well today. So if you have some questions, feel free to type those in there. With the number of people on the webinar today, if there are a lot of questions, I won't be able to address all of them, but I will do my best at trying to answer some of the questions that are there. And at the end of this webinar, as well as also my contact information, that if there are further questions or things that I don't get to in this specific webinar, then you can feel free to reach out, and I will do my best to answer questions that way as well. So with that, we are going to jump right on in. I love this visual because I love just how precarious this stack of boxes looks. And in many ways, I feel like this is what survivors of trauma are carrying around with them. Because for those who have complex trauma is basically what it sounds like, trauma that has more complex effects from it. Some what we would call, so in the mental health world, sometimes we refer to it as little t traumas and big T traumas. So there are lots of little t traumas that we go through and experience, ending of relationships, or, and really depending on the context, it could be either a little t or a big T trauma, any of these examples. But for someone who experiences trauma, typically they have some reactions to it. They feel bad afterwards. It's not a pleasant experience. It is something that they feel fearful of, or their life or safety was threatened. Their health was threatened over it. And in any sort of traumatic event, people have reactions to it. They cope with it in various ways, and hopefully they are able to integrate it into their life and move on from it, so that the effects of that trauma don't show up and inhibit their daily functioning. And that's what should happen if you experience some kind of trauma. The problem is that obviously some traumas are more difficult to deal with. Some people have less resources or less coping skills to deal with it. And people get to the point where they don't move on from it, and it still continues to affect their functioning in their daily life, even long after that traumatic event has happened. And so that is when it starts to become what we would classify as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or even complex trauma. And complex trauma can happen, it can develop from several things. When trauma that occurs at the hands of caregivers, when, especially for younger children, or the trauma is perpetrated by those who are supposed to love and care about us. That becomes particularly complex to deal with when we're thinking about coping from that, because that just by very nature, the people who are supposed to love you and care for you were the ones that hurt you. And that becomes really difficult and tough to work through. Also, trauma that is of an interpersonal nature is, generally speaking, more traumatic than trauma that's not. So say a rape or a sexual assault is generally more traumatic than a natural disaster that may happen, say like a flood. Now, again, this is all on a spectrum. It all is depending on how many traumas you're dealing with here. If we think about catastrophic flooding and, say Hurricane Katrina, that was obviously very traumatic for people. So we're speaking in generalities here again. I'm not speaking in, I think it's a case-by-case basis for people. However, we know that interpersonal trauma, when you are hurt by someone who is close to you, someone that maybe you don't even know, but that interpersonal nature typically makes the trauma that is experienced more complex. And then we also know that trauma, that when you have multiple traumatic events, that tends to make the reactions more complex as well. So multiple traumatic events, the stacking of these boxes, like we see with this person carrying here, is people typically have lots of trauma that happens, and that's incredibly unfortunate. Some people start out their lives and they are dealing with childhood abuse, whether that's physical abuse or sexual abuse or neglect. They are starting out their life carrying a pretty big box. And as they grow older, they have other traumatic events that may happen. Maybe there are other types of sexual assault that happen throughout their lifetime. Perhaps there is domestic violence that they experience in relationships. That can be another box that's added to their stack. One of the things we have been talking about specifically recently, although it's not a recent phenomenon, is just the racial based trauma that is happening, and seems to be, it feels like it's just increasing. It's every time we turn around. And again, it's not a new thing, it's been happening. So for some people, there are many boxes they have stacked up for all the racism and the discrimination and the hate crimes that they have experienced. And then Tracy talked about last week in the last webinar, hopefully you were able to join in that one, that the box that we are all carrying around right now is just the COVID-19 trauma, and how we are all in active trauma together, dealing with this pandemic and the changes that have happened from it, and the people around us that are sick or dying, the losses that we are experiencing through this, loss of friendships, kids not being able to go to school and see their friends in person, or routines and hobbies and things that people have lost. These are all different kinds of trauma, and they all stack up. And the more boxes that you have, as you can imagine, the more precarious this stack gets. And so as we're thinking about trauma today, and as we are talking about it, I want you to keep this visual in mind, because even small things that may happen might be the last tiny little box on the top that tipped the whole stack over. And we're not just talking about how like one specific kind of trauma affects someone and one box that they are holding, although it definitely can, but really we're talking about complex trauma is the compounding effect that it has when we start to look at all the different kinds of trauma that people have experienced. And the thing we know about survivors of sexual assault, that I am, again, making some assumptions, but that we are working with survivors in that population, that we know that is often not the only kind of trauma they have experienced as well. And so let's just kind of keep that in mind today, is that we're talking about lots of different kinds of trauma that affect us and the people that we work with. And so this is, it's not a new article. It was shared, I've got the reference down there, but man, that's what, 17 years ago now. The authors put out this study. It was a white paper on complex trauma, and they sort of laid out, here's what we think complex trauma does to people, and here's how we think it impacts people. And they basically identified 7 domains of a person's life that are impaired by trauma. The first one is attachment, which is really what we're talking about, is like how we connect to one another. The relationships that we're in, trusting one another. We know many survivors that we work with have difficulty trusting people because that trust has been broken. But really, that's a function of trauma, is that's what trauma does, is it impairs our ability to be in healthy relationship with people, and to attach in healthy ways, because people have been dangerous, and they have been often the ones that people have been the cause of the harm that someone has experienced. And so we can kind of clearly see how that would impair attachment. Second domain would be just the way trauma affects our bodies. It affects us down to a cellular level. It affects how the processes in our bodies work, like the systems in our organs, how they function. A lot of people talk about the somatic symptoms that they feel, like the headaches and the stomach aches and the chest pains, or just not feeling well, like their body is affected by this trauma and what has happened to them. Also, it affects a person's ability to feel emotions, to recognize what that emotion is, name it, label it, to be able to show it on their face, so that you can see changes in, we call it the changes in affect that someone has, like how you can see the emotion on their face and in their body. Trauma impairs that, and also impairs their ability to regulate those emotions, so that they don't become completely overwhelmed, or they don't become completely numb, so that they don't feel any emotion at all. And so it's difficult to balance the regulation of those emotions. Also difficult to balance and control various behaviors that people have. So trauma can lead to trouble regulating impulses. and you know, basic ways of interacting with other people. And that's often very closely tied to the emotional regulation, because those are very intertwined with people. But you know, be impulsive and sort of, some people could even say like out of control. Those kinds of behaviors are sometimes a result of trauma. Trauma also changes not only what we think, like the thoughts that are in our head, but it also changes how we think. The structures in our brain that we use for thinking, but it impairs, trauma impairs just all of our thinking life, which is, you know, really drives a lot of our emotions, our behaviors, our reactions, everything. So trauma changes how we think and what we think. It also greatly impairs the ability to remain present and connected with yourself. So dissociation it's like the zoning out, you know, it's the disconnection that people feel when you could just like go away in your mind and be in another place. That is a form of dissociation. Daydreaming is a form of dissociation. It's a minor one. We all do it, but when we do that, we go away in our mind and we're not present and connected with the very moment that we are in. And so trauma by nature does that. It impairs our ability to remain present and connected to ourselves. And then lastly, the researcher said, hey, it impairs our self-concept, like what we think of ourselves and how we relate to other people. And so at a basic, I was looking at this and I thought, you know, there's not many domain, I can't really think of many other domains in a person's life that would be unaffected or unimpaired by trauma. So really we're thinking about like this, it affects pretty much every part of a person and how they function, how they interact with others. And it looks like a lot of different things. So for people in trauma, irritability and anger, let's all start there. You know, how many people, because of the COVID pandemic, this kind of trauma that we are experiencing, have noticed an increase in irritability? If you could see me right now, my hand is raised. You know, I'm angry about some things that I've lost, or I'm angry about the way the world is right now, and the hurt and the further trauma that is happening to people. That's a pretty, I would say, a pretty common one for people who have experienced trauma. Hypervigilance, though, we're going to talk a lot more about this today too. Is just like when bad things keep happening, we just have to stay on our toes. We have to stay on alert. And people who have experienced a lot of trauma, that's kind of the state they live in. When's the next bad thing going to happen? And it creates this internal hypervigilance. You know, and the arrow at the bottom is supposed to be representative of things are on a spectrum here. You know, one person's anger may not look like another person's anger. You know, there is different levels of anger, different levels of hypervigilance. You know, somebody's suicidal thoughts may range from, man, I just wish this was all over, to the other end of the spectrum, where they are developing a plan and they are, you know, getting access to the means to kill themselves. You know, we know that those things are on a spectrum, that it's going to look different for different people, and it's more intense for some people than others. And not everybody's going to have the exact same symptoms of trauma. Rumination is another one I think that's worth pointing out here, is just thinking about this stuff over and over again. It's my goodness, if you turn on the news, it's hard to even get away from. I mean, the news is filled every day with just more trauma, with more terrible things that are happening, wildfires, and you know, the latest in what's happening with COVID-19. My goodness, it feels like just more police shootings are happening, or more racially based hate crimes are happening as well. And so even after we turn off the news, even after we escape our phones and social media, people who have experienced trauma and who are living in active trauma, even after you get away from the direct exposure to it, you're still thinking about it. You're still thinking about it all day long. You're remembering the, you know, pictures that you saw, or thinking about the things that have happened, and you can't get it out of your head. And those are also sometimes the intrusive thoughts, where you just can't stop thinking about it no matter what you do. That's another symptom of trauma. That's a symptom of PTSD, is that you can't make your brain stop. Another symptom of PTSD, though, what is also pretty common for people, is avoidance. The nature of PTSD is wanting to avoid what it is that reminds you of the trauma. And so not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to go places that remind you of what has happened, not wanting to be around people or things that remind you of it. Any of those triggers, for people dealing with PTSD, it's really there is a lot of effort put into avoiding things. That's why some people develop substance use and substance abuse issues, because you can shut down. You can not think about it. You can make your brain shut off for a little bit, or numb it so you don't have to feel anything. And that's why, like, substance abuse works for people, like, in the sense of it's a coping skill for them that helps shut down the thoughts and the feelings that go with it. And I think it's just another form of avoidance for people. We'll talk a little bit more about memory loss today as well, but again, just kind of keeping in mind, it just looks different for different people. And while there are similarities in responses and effects, not everybody reacts to trauma the same way. And that's part of being trauma informed. And what we're talking about today is really looking at the survivors that we're working with, even our own selves, to identify what are the symptoms that this person is having. It's an individualized approach, and identifying individually what their symptoms of trauma do actually look like. And a lot of this is just based in how our brain responds to trauma. And so before we can really talk about this, we have to talk a little bit about how the brain develops, and what some basic structures are in the brain, what these parts of the brain do. Let me just make a quick disclaimer here, saying I'm not a medical doctor, you know, I'm not a neuroscientist, and I've learned a lot. There are so many great resources that if this is of interest to you, you should absolutely go and read and explore and learn more about it. I can send some recommendations, but one of my favorite books on this is called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's by Bessel van der Kolk. He just writes in a way that's easy to understand. Bruce Perry is another wonderful author and psychiatrist who has done a lot of research in neuroscience, and is able to put things in a very understandable approach because it's a pretty complex the brain is pretty complex to understand. And so I am grateful for them putting it in English and layman's terms that I can wrap my head around. So the brain develops in an upward fashion. So it starts down here in the brainstem. This is sort of the first thing that develops when the brain is starting to develop in utero. And the majority of the brain develops in utero. However, a lot of the connections and development can still happen, obviously, after birth, in terms of, you know, like all learning is kind of done after birth, obviously. But the basic structures, everything is there. The actual volume of the brain increases after birth. But the brainstem's the first thing that develops. The brainstem's really responsible for basic functions of survival. Your breathing, regulating your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your body temperature, your basic like motor functions of your body, things that you don't have to think about. You know, just sort of these automatic processes in your body. That's what like the lower regions of your brain and brainstem. When you think about brainstem and lower regions, I want you to think survival. Okay. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to kind of refer to the middle part of the brain as the limbic system. There's lots of different names and ways you can talk about the various parts of the brain, but this is the part this is sort of the divisions that make sense to me. So the limbic system here is sort of in the middle, and it controls basic like emotions and emotional components of memory. It's the part that interprets nonverbal information. So when you see somebody making a scowl on their face, your limbic system is processing that information and saying, hey, I think that person is angry, and sort of interpreting that information. And emotional regulation is in here, sort of in this middle limbic system. And then the last thing that develops is the cortex, which is this part on top, and the prefrontal cortex, which is at the front. And this part is responsible for higher and more complex functions of the brain, like abstract thinking, problem solving, logic, you know, like learning something, doing something in the past, evaluating the results of it, changing your actions in the future to get a different outcome, kind of evaluating cause and effect. That's all prefrontal cortex up at the top. Inhibiting actions, you know, like restraining yourself from yelling at someone when you want to, that's a prefrontal cortex action up here. And so these three systems obviously work together, but they hold pretty different functions when we're talking about trauma, and it affects these different parts differently. And so the way that the brain develops, we have neurons in our brains, and they're just little structures in there, and they talk to one another and they connect. There's a signal that's sent. It's an electrical impulse sent between the neurons, and that's called a synapse. And the more that those particular neurons talk through that synapse, and when that synapse fires, the more that that's repeated and happens between those particular neurons, the stronger that particular connection becomes. And so it can become like an automatic, like a groove or a rut, you know, like in a well-beaten path through a field, where it just becomes like an automatic connection. You know exactly where to go. It's the same thing that happens each time. So for example, a simple one would be like a smile. That neuron registers the smile, the synapse automatically kind of connects and registers that information as a happy emotion or a pleasant emotion. Your neurons would fire. Another example could be like the smell of smoke. When that neuron, the smoke, it fires and connects, and that other neuron kind of understands that synapse, the synaptical connection, and it interprets it as danger. And so it's not something they really have to think about. It's not it's just an automatic reaction. If we smell smoke, we think there's danger. There's a fire somewhere. We need to investigate what that's about. And this is a good thing, because really what this does is that when in traumatic experiences, the brain adapts pretty quickly and it learns what equals danger. And so when these synapses fire together and they create this groove and this rut in the brain, these automatic connections, it just really helps the brain develop in a way that helps someone survive. Because if you hear a noise and you're in your house alone at night, you hear a noise, the quicker your brain can interpret that noise as possible danger, then the better chance you have for survival. So say for a child who has been sexually abused for a long time, if they hear, the creak of the wood floor in the hallway, or they hear the car door slam and they know that, their father is home from work, as soon as they hear that car door slam or the creak in the hallway, their reactions, their brain is already wired to know that sound equals danger. And that helps them prepare for, the oncoming abuse or danger that is going to happen. And so really it's all about helping the brain prepare to react to the danger that's coming. And the way it does that is through what I call the alarm system in the brain. And that really it's a structure called the amygdala. It's a little almond-shaped structure in the limbic system down here. And the amygdala's job is to take in information through the 5 senses. It takes in information through sight, smell, sound, taste, and touch. And it scans that information for threat. And it's just looking through and trying to find, is any of this information that I am sensing and taking in, is there anything in there that could possibly mean danger? And just like if it smells smoke or if it hears that particular noise, the alarm system says, like the amygdala says, hey, there's danger coming, we need to sound the alarm. And that's what turns on your stress response system in your body, which is the fight, flight, or freeze responses. The sympathetic nervous system is what kicks in first, and that gives you sort of the energy and the impulses to respond. It gears you up to be able to address or deal with the danger that's coming. And typically what should happen for most people is that once that, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, you handle or address the threat. And then once the danger has passed, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and it's what helps you calm down and relax. It helps you realize, okay, the threat is gone. I don't have to be all keyed up anymore. We can turn the alarm system off in the body. And the problem is that trauma messes up this balance and that this alarm system can become sensitized, where it's turned on way too easily, turned on before there's really a full assessment of the danger and whether it's there or not. And once it's turned on, it's kind of like it gets stuck in the on position, where it's hard for a traumatized person to shut it off and to calm back down. And so that's kind of where this hypervigilance comes in, when that alarm system is on completely. So again, with the noise example, if you hear, so let's take someone who has been assaulted. They've had that experience. Their brain has registered some of the sounds that went with that trauma, and they are at home, they hear a noise in their house. Their brain in that moment doesn't really stop and take the time to think through all the possible or likely reasons why there could be a noise in their house. It just instantly reacts and turns on and makes them think and prepare for someone breaking in to hurt them. When, you know, if for some people who haven't maybe had that experience, if you can slow that process down a little bit, somebody could think through, oh, wait a second, my house is, you know, 80 years old and it creaks and groans sometimes. And it's actually, you know, kind of windy outside right now. And so I think it might just be the house settling, like that there could be some other possible reasons for that noise. But for somebody who's living in this active trauma, for somebody who's had a lot of complex trauma, when their system has become so sensitized, there's not that stop and think, you know, rationally about it. It just is automatic. Another example would be a girl that I worked with. She was sexually abused and trafficked by her neighbor. She would come home from school in the afternoons and would go over to her neighbor's house, and he would, you know, like essentially watch her until her and her brother until their mom got home from work. And what would happen was he would send her sort of down to their basement, the basement that he had. And when he would bring other people down to the basement to abuse her, one of the first things he would always say is, "Look at this girl, isn't she so pretty? She's such a pretty little girl." And that for her was one of those early warning signs, and it's a very strong trigger for her, being called pretty. And because she knew then, okay, here goes, I'm getting ready to be hurt again by someone else this time. And so what happened is she thankfully was able, that abuse was able to be discovered and stopped, and she got to a safe place. And I was working with her in therapy a few years later, and she realized that, like, every time she would go out into public when she was a teenager, people would always like give her that compliment, and they would say, "Oh, you're so pretty." And because, you know, that's typically what people tend to focus on with girls, which is a small soapbox of mine, which I won't get on, but people comment on girls and how they look all the time. And like, that's a routine compliment that some people could get. And so for her, every time like somebody's just trying to be nice to her and they're trying to make conversation or they're trying to be polite, they're like, "Oh, you look so pretty." But for her, as soon as she heard that term, pretty, her alarm system went off. And she did not feel safe around those people because her alarm system is screaming, "This person is danger. This person is going to hurt you. Get away, get away." And so she would completely shut down. She would be out with her family or, you know, would be at church on a Sunday morning. And if somebody said that to her, gave her that compliment, it was like she couldn't even stand up anymore. She sort of withdrew into herself and totally shut down. And from the outside, some people would look at that and say, "Well, man, she doesn't know how to take a compliment," or, "Well, what's wrong with her?" Because you could visibly see that she felt really uncomfortable with that. But that was her alarm system in her brain just trying to protect her. And so I think part of our trauma-informed lens that we are looking through is looking at people's responses and how they're responding to what's going on around them, trying to see, like, is it this alarm system that's going off? Do they feel like they're in danger? And trying to recognize, like really valuing and recognizing that their brain is just trying to protect them, and helping survivors understand this for themselves. Anybody who's going through trauma, you know, part of those reactions we talked about is the shame and the self-blame. Why do I react this way? How come I can't just be, you know, normal? Or, you know, all of those disparaging remarks that people say about themselves. If we can help reframe it for them, that helping them understand that their brain is doing a good job. Their brain is really has a good intention for them. It's trying to protect them from something that feels like it could be dangerous. I think that that can help reduce a little bit of that like stigma and shame that's happening for them. So what happens after the alarm system goes off is the amygdala says, hey, there's danger. We need to get ready to address this, this threat that's coming. And so what happens is the amygdala signals the hypothalamus, which for simplicity's sake is like information control processing center up here in the brain. And hypothalamus then signals the pituitary gland, which is responsible for release of hormones in the body. So like the pituitary gland is what kicks in when kids hit puberty, you know, when they're releasing all these hormones into their body. So the pituitary gland signals the adrenals. And the adrenal cortex, they sit on top of the kidneys. And that's where the actual hormones and chemicals come from. And they get released from down here and they sort of flood the whole system of the body. And there's a bunch of different kinds of chemicals that get released. And it's not the same for everybody. It gets released in varying, you know, recipes and degrees, different kinds of chemicals and differing amounts for different people at different times. And so one sort of category of chemicals that gets released is catecholamines. And this includes adrenaline, epinephrine. It includes dopamine and but adrenaline is the one I think that, you know, most people are familiar with. We know what it does. It gets us geared up. It gets us ready and focused and energized. And that's what sort of kicks in our fight or flight response is the epinephrine or the adrenaline. Now, this has to work in sort of conjunction with cortisol. Cortisol is a very important chemical when we're talking about stress response. And its job is to take the stored glucose, the glucose that's stored in your liver, and it takes it and it releases it, signals the release from your liver and into your bloodstream so that you have a steady supply of blood sugar available, your energy available to carry out that fight or flight response. So you could have the adrenaline that gets you all jacked up and ready to go, but you also need the cortisol that's giving you the actual like blood sugar that you need to carry out and have the energy to carry out those responses. Cortisol is an amazing chemical because it also, when your amygdala and your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland are all communicating about which hormones need to be released, it's kind of also prioritizing some body functions in your body at the moment. And so cortisol suppresses some other functions in the body, like the immune system, where it suppresses the digestive system and the reproductive systems, the growth systems in your body. Because in a moment of danger, and when your brain thinks that you are under direct, you know, significant threat, those processes are not super important for the body's survival. You know, immune system, yes, is important for survival, but not when you may not survive the next 5 minutes. And I hope that makes sense. But this is part of the reason why trauma affects the body. And when we talk about people whose alarm systems are on for long periods of time, and I'm sure I'm going to be coming back to this. Next week, we're going to be talking about how trauma affects various parts of the body. I know in a couple weeks, Rhea is going to be also sharing about the ACEs study and intergenerational trauma. Like this, it's all kind of coming back to what cortisol does to our body. It's an amazing help in a moment of danger, but it also can have disastrous effects if it is present in your body for too long. Yeah. Here's the thing. There's also something that happens is when your amygdala is looking at this threat and it's trying to figure out like how to respond. Am I going to fight back? Am I going to try to fight my way out of this? Am I just going to have to run? And if your amygdala is looking at this and it's still taking in information through those 5 senses, and the amygdala is interpreting it and saying, you know what, fighting back is not an option right now. Or getting away from this and fleeing is not an option either. There's also another response called the freeze response, and that's sometimes called tonic immobility, because tonic immobility is sort of a state where cortisol shuts off. It kind of shuts off to like a low energy mode to preserve energy. When when your phone is dying and it goes into low battery mode, kind of shuts down the apps running in the background and gives you a lower light on your screen. That's kind of what cortisol does in that moment, where it shifts to a low energy mode and it makes a person in that moment freeze. And I think this is incredibly important for some survivors of sexual assault or rape who blame themselves for freezing up in the moment. When they talk about, I've heard so many people tell me, like, why didn't I fight back? Why didn't I scream? I couldn't do anything. I just froze. I just laid there. I couldn't do anything. And it's important to help people know that this is a chemical reaction that happens in the body. It is a survival mechanism. I'm going backwards here. So you see this process, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, adrenals, even starting in the amygdala. There is nothing that happens in this cascade that is going through the prefrontal cortex. None of these decisions are running through the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for the decision making. It's responsible for, evaluating risk and, planning out the best course of action. This process literally skips the prefrontal cortex is not engaged in this process. And so it's not a decision that people are making when their bodies sort of shut down or when they decide to fight back or run away or do nothing at all. It is their bodies and their brain's best way of evaluating the situation and promoting survival. And I think, again, I've just said this, but I think it's really important to help survivors understand that, because that, again, it eases that self-blame and that talk that they have in their head of why did I react this way? I wish I would have done something different. And there's some varying levels of tonic immobility. Some people shut down completely, where it's like they pass out and black out and don't remember anything. Some people remember it. Some people have some ability of actual movement in their body, but they're just not able to mount a fight or flight response. But again, it's coming back to the chemical reactions. It's coming back to the brain's attempt to promote survival under threat. The other cool thing that the brain does is that, obviously, like, if you're in a bad situation, you're having a traumatic event is occurring, your brain is feeling scared, your body is hurting, there's pain, your brain does two things. Number one, it can release, you have sort of natural opioids in your system, which helps sort of numb the pain that someone is experiencing in that moment. And then it also can release oxytocin, which that's a chemical that is released when mothers are breastfeeding and nursing their infants. It's a bonding chemical. It's a feel-good chemical. And so the brain is like, well, okay, we'll suppress the pain and we'll give you some good feelings as well to try to make this situation feel a little bit better. And I think it's interesting to think about the connections with oxytocin and bonding when we think about traumatic bonding with the perpetrators, and people who have trauma bonds with the people who are hurting them. They still feel connected and positive towards these people who have hurt them, which is more than what we can get into totally today for the scope of what we're talking about. But I love how the brain, it has good intentions, and it wants to help promote survival, and it wants to help make things better. And so it does that with the resources at its disposal, which are the varying chemicals that that get released from our bodies, which I just think is fascinating. I hope you do too. So let me stop here and just see, are there any questions? Is this making sense? Is there any parts of this that are helpful, or things that are coming up for you? Any questions that you are kind of pondering and mulling over in your head as we're talking about this today? If you do have a question, type it in the chat so I can see it, but I'll give it just a minute to see if anything's popping up for people. And thank you, Eric, let's see, who was it? Gabriella posted the links in there to The Body Keeps the Score. That link in there so that you can see which books I'm referencing. That's a great one too. Somebody asked about a fawn response in addition to fight, flight, freeze. I personally don't know much about that. I feel like I have maybe heard of it, but I wouldn't know enough to speak on it with any sort of coherent ability. So I'm sorry. I don't know much about the fawn response. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. I'll try to keep my eye on that chat if there are other questions as well. Some other important things that are affected in the brain by trauma. This particular structure is called the hippocampus. It is near the amygdala, but really it's responsible for memory and kind of storing memories. Its job, again, is kind of like the amygdala. It takes in information through the five senses about a given experience or about something that, there's a memory or, the moment that you're in. And so it takes in, so if you imagine each of these squares is sort of like a data point. It's something that's noticed or, to be remembered about an event. So you have all the sights, the smells, sound, taste, touch. You've got thoughts and feelings associated with a given event. And it's impossible, right, to remember every single detail about something. And so what the hippocampus does is that it takes that information and it sort of sorts through and says, okay, here's what the important things are. Here's what we're going to remember about a given event. Here's the, sights that we're going to remember. Here's the, the smells and the thought components of this particular event or memory. And it sort of consolidates it down, chooses which parts to remember. And then in my head, I kind of like imagine it like a file folder. So you have a file folder in your brain of all of these events or memories. So when you need to recall an event, like I want to remember, high school prom, you find that file folder, you open it up, and then you have the components of your memory in there, the things you remember seeing, your thoughts and various components of that memory. that is how that should work in a normal, non-traumatized brain. What happens is the chemicals that get released, you know, all that cortisol, all the adrenaline, everything, in those moments when survival is the most important, accurately storing a memory is not the most important thing. It's not most important to survival. And so what happens is those chemicals kind of skew that process and interfere with this consolidation process. Some components of the memories, the things that you see, would get completely disregarded. Some, you know, important components of what, especially like think about in an investigation, somebody who has filed a police report and they are being interviewed by an investigator about, say, a sexual assault that happened. And the investigator says, well, what was, you know, the perpetrator wearing? And they are racking their brain. And because none of these are in order, you know, it's like a sloppy mess in that file folder. They can't quickly come to, you know, what sites they remember from that particular experience. Maybe some of those sites were completely left out of that file folder. They have a hard time remembering and reporting details of particular memories. And it's hard for survivors to like put this all into a coherent narrative of events for reporting and like giving a memory to someone, especially like if we think about like during an investigation. Or oftentimes people will come and sit in the therapy office with me and they're trying to tell me about an event, like some traumas that they have been through, and they are skipping around all over the place. And I get like bits and pieces here and there, and it takes me a while to put the story together because it's so scattered. And this is because the hippocampus is impaired by the amygdala, by the cortisol, and by all the chemicals that get released in this process. Another way to kind of think about it is like we talk about and we know about right brain versus left brain, right? So left brain is the like logical, sequential, you know, analytical part of the brain. And when we talk about right brain people or people who, you know, are more, they lean more towards that side of their brain, that's the like emotional components and artistic side of them, where it's visual and spatial and it's intuitive, like the intuitive parts of an experience are kind of stored in the right brain. And one of the things Bessel van der Kolk talks a lot about is how in a lot of the research that he's done and that they did at the Trauma Institute up in Boston was that they noticed that they were doing brain scans on people who were remembering traumatic events, and very clearly over a lot of different people, a lot of time, it just very clearly showed that remembering trauma, it activates the right hemisphere of the brain and it deactivates the left. So not that the left is not working at all, but that it is much more reduced. And so what that looks like is that survivors, no matter what traumatic experience they're talking about, sometimes it's difficult to put it into words, to put names on it, and to give a coherent narrative of what happened. If you can't do that, if you can't give a coherent narrative, if you can't sequence events, then it's hard to identify cause and effect. And think about, like long-term effects of actions. Like it impairs what we would say is their executive functioning. When you're thinking about a reduced left brain activity, when you're remembering traumatic events. And so it's lighting up the right-hand side, which is why people can tell you what an experience like felt like emotionally, how scared they were. They vividly remember that. Or they can tell you like the intuitive truth of what happened. Like what happened was wrong. It shouldn't have happened that way. I shouldn't have been treated this way. That is the right side of the brain lighting up, which is, it's that sort of the deeper emotional intuitive connection to memories and events, which again, I just think it's fascinating to see that the brain scans reflect what I have noticed and what I see in working with survivors of lots of different kinds of traumas, is that the brain kind of works the same for all people. It's affected no matter the kind of trauma. And a lot of the things that we as advocates or therapists or caseworkers are dealing with, like sometimes can be pretty frustrating when you're trying to understand a story and understand what happened and help people understand like risk and how to stay safe in the future. This is because different areas of the brain have been impacted by the trauma and are, currently being used and activated even when the trauma is over and they're just remembering it. It still affects, even after the trauma is over, how their brain works and processes information. The other thing to kind of note and consider in all of this is that traumatic brain injuries are in my experience, and I think that they're grossly underdiagnosed. With domestic violence, with sexual assault, with other kinds of traumas that can happen, physical abuse, people hit their head a lot. And those can result in some significant traumatic brain injuries, which also can contribute to memory loss, why people can't remember things well. It can change like their personality and the way they interact with themselves and other people. And again, those executive functioning skills that we've been talking about, of like assessing risky situations. Like, hey, if I'm, a stranger is talking to me on the street, is this something that's safe, or is this something that feels maybe a little risky? Assessing that kind of safety. Problem solving skills are sort of diminished, and it obviously depends on which areas of the brain are impacted or injured in those TBIs, but if at all it becomes like a concern, if you know that at any point a survivor that you're working with, if they had an injury to their head, if they lost consciousness, that's another big screening question for a TBI, is at any point did you lose consciousness? If that answer is yes, then we also should be referring them to medical providers to get assessments and scans to just be assessed for TBIs, because not only does the trauma itself affect just mentally how we're coping and dealing with the trauma, but there could actually be physical damage that could have happened to parts of the brain that we also just need to take into account as well. That's a lot of kind of heavy and negative stuff, really, when we take a step back to think about it. Is sort of, it can become kind of hopeless if you think about all the ways that trauma damages us. But the beauty and the silver lining of it, and the hope that really is there, is a wonderful thing we call neuroplasticity. Just that the brain isn't just stuck that way. It has the ability to create new connections. It has the ability to rewire itself so that a person's brain can learn how to not, the alarm system doesn't have to be on all the time. We can learn and make new connections in order to react in different ways and heal from the trauma. Each time a survivor has a positive experience with someone, whether it's a stranger, whether it's a friend, whether it's you as their advocate or the caseworker or their therapist, each time they have a positive experience with someone, it leads, they are literally making a new connection in their brain. Wow, this, you know, this person treated me with respect. You know, this person didn't assume something about me because of the color of my skin. This person, you know, didn't look me up and down and treat my body as just an object. You know, they treated me with respect. And each time they have that, again, kind of like all those negative experiences, it built that groove or that rut. They have to have that many more positive experiences to rewire it and make that the new groove, the new kind of deepest rut, where that becomes the automatic assumption. It's like, yes, I am worthy of respect. Yes, people should treat me with dignity when they are interacting with me. So resilience, when we're talking about like healing and resilience from trauma, it's built by practicing new thoughts and new actions and new ways of responding and having new positive experiences, which I think it, again, is the hope of healing, but it also is really empowering to us as the providers, as service providers on the other side of saying, every interaction I have with the survivor is important. The people that I'm working with, every single thing I do has the potential to create positive, lasting impact on this person's brain. You are literally helping to rewire it. And so on those days, because if you're anything like me, we have all had the days where we sit back and we're like, what am I doing? Like, why am I in this job? I didn't do anything useful today. It didn't help anybody. You know, it just seems like I'm spinning my wheels. If you had any sort of positive interaction with somebody, you really did make a difference for them. And I don't say that lightly, because we literally have to think about it as you made new connections in their brains, and that is literally, it's helping rewire their experiences, which I think is important. One thing I wanted to share too, because this is how we rewire our brains sometimes. It's something Tracy maybe touched on last week. I'm going to send this out as a handout that you can refer back to as well. But this is a grounding exercise that I take people through to help them just reconnect with themselves in the moment. This is how we get the alarm system to turn off. When somebody's alarm system is on and they are feeling like they are in danger and under threat, we have to get them connected to the moment again, because a lot of times triggers and memories set off that alarm system when there's no actual physical, you know, present danger. And so we can get people to look around the room, like in my office where I am right now, I can see the door. And I can look at the door right now and tell you it's a white door, and it's got a 9-paneled like glass so that I can see outside. And I'm looking at my door, and I'm looking, and I can see right now no one is trying to come into the door and hurt me. And so I have to sort of, what I would tell clients or somebody that I'm working with is like, say that out loud. No one is trying to hurt me right now. And I'm like looking around the room to make sure that no one is trying to hurt me. So you're grounding them in that moment, and you're helping them kind of speak to their brain through the language of the 5 senses It's speaking that language to help the brain realize that the alarm system does not need to be on right now, that there's no danger or threat, we can turn the alarm system off. You know, touching things, whether it's a soft a pillow or a blanket, or pets are really great to like just stroke and feel pets in those moments. Smell is very grounding. Aromatherapy is super helpful. If you've got candles or lotions, scented lotions, you can, you know, I like to have these things sort of available in like a little basket next to the couch in my office where my clients sit, so that they can just grab those things and use them as they're needed. And it just helps kind of keep them grounded throughout the session too. But again, going through the five senses, finishing out with hearing and tasting something, just helps. Again, when you pair it with those messages of like, I'm safe right now. I don't need to panic. No one is trying to hurt me. I am okay. I'm in a safe space. Things like that help send the messages to the brain that the alarm system can be turned off. The other thing that I think, which I've kind of already mentioned when I'm talking about your interactions with survivors, is just, it's the idea of that the relationships that we have with them are transformational. They really are. That when you interact with them, the ways you interact with them really do have a positive impact on them. And it really, it's kind of conditional. In the mental health world, we talk a lot about in the therapeutic relationship, unconditional positive regard is really important. That somebody can come in and tell me the decisions they've made over the weekend, the things they've done in their past, and I will not judge them. I'm not going to look at them any different. I'm not going to be like, oh, that's gross, get out of my office. That really, I have a genuine positive regard for my clients, the people that we're working with. And that is transformational to people, knowing that they can lay all their stuff bare with you and be in their really ugly moments when they're really struggling, and know that they are still okay with you, and that we are able to kind of give that acceptance to people. It's really, really powerful. I think it's something to think about. Like, this COVID pandemic has changed the way we do this some. You know, like I have been doing virtual sessions with my clients, and I haven't met with clients for therapy sessions in person in several months. And that changes things. It's different to not be able to be there and not have that, you know, just the power of sitting in the room with someone. That has changed. I think even when we do meet with people and we're wearing masks, that's inhibiting our connection with people to some degree. I mean, it's definitely helping, I think, because we are helping keep each other safe by wearing masks, but we lose, you know, some of the nonverbal, you know, facial expressions and communications that we have with people. So we're talking about being like trauma informed, like asking people, if we have the ability, you know, asking what their preferences are. Do you want me to wear a mask? Do you, you know, even being extra intentional about showing emotion, you know, with your eyes and other, you know, with hand gestures or things like that, that how can we still communicate connection with people when they can't see our smile? And then I think another really important thing about maintaining these sort of transformational relationships, especially during this time, is acknowledging and talking about the issues of race that are happening, especially like if I am a white therapist, I'm a white woman, and if I have some clients who are people of color, we need to talk about that. We need to talk about how they feel about that. We need to acknowledge just the incredible, you know, the racial the climate of racial tensions that are there, and making sure that we're being intentional about the relationships that we're in, and doing our best to be the best that we can. You don't have to be perfect. You know, I'm not telling, you know, every white person that they're a racist and that they have to, you know, go work on themselves. But I think we all have to work on ourselves. We all have to examine, you know, any of our interactions, and is there bias that we don't know of? Is there, you know, discrimination or, you know, any of that in our hearts or minds or our interactions with our clients? And we just have to be able to talk about it openly, because talking about it and acknowledging it is what is really powerful for people. And I think that that's also, it's just part of what helps create and maintain these kinds of relationships that we're talking about, these transformational relationships. So I know we're coming down to the end of our time, but lastly, I want to talk about just the idea of vicarious trauma. If you've been in the field of, you know, social work or social services, I am sure we're talking about, you know, self-care and how this work affects us, and working with survivors of trauma. Even as we experience vicarious trauma, it is absolutely, it's still trauma. Vicarious sort of like I feel like in some ways it minimizes it, just that word. But really, it is still a trauma that we are experiencing. And some of this, again, is based in how our brains work and what our brains do. You may have heard of mirror neurons. These are specific kinds of neurons that we have in our brain that fire when we see an action performed, or like when we're looking at babies are a great example. If your face lights up and you smile at a baby, most of the time, you know, they will smile back at you, because the mirror neurons in that baby's brain are recognizing the smile and the happiness on the other person, and it's mirroring that response. And so these mirror neurons, they fire and they light up when they light up both when we are performing a certain action and when we observe that action performed by another person. So, for example, the neurons that would fire in my brain when I pick up my cup off my desk, when I pick it up and set it back down, that part of my brain lights up the exact same way as when I just watch somebody pick up a cup off the table and set it back down. It was crazy. There were some Italian scientists that discovered these in the 1980s. They were doing studies on monkeys at that point, and it was sort of like an accidental discovery. But what they realized is the same parts of the monkey's brain were lighting up when the researcher grabbed something off the table as when the monkey would do that same action. And so really, I just led to a whole field of research that really kind of emphasized, and it has impact on empathy and why we feel empathy. It's why emotions can feel so contagious. Like why negativity and sadness can be passed around to the other people in the room. You know, somebody comes in a terrible mood, and then all of a sudden everybody else is starting to get irritable too. It's those mirror neurons are picking up on that, and they are starting to fire and feel in some of the same ways as well. And so when we think about, like, for us, whose job it is to sit with people in trauma, to hear their stories and to see their pain, see their tears. It's the same process. When we see that in people, the same parts of our brains fire and they light up, and we feel a part of that emotion as well. It's not the exact same. I'm not saying we are all experiencing the exact same thing, you know, the idea of like, I understand what you're going through. No, it's not the exact same, but those parts of our brain are still lighting up, and it is still, it's like, I kind of imagine like echoes of these emotions that we are experiencing and feeling just by being with the people who have been traumatized and who are sitting and dealing with this pain. And so it's really, really important that we are taking care of ourselves, that we are acknowledging, how we feel after interacting with, survivors. If we feel drained and exhausted and tired or irritable or angry, that's valid, and that's really important to acknowledge and deal with, because not only are we feeling it from the people, the clients and the people that we are working with, but because of our own trauma as well, it echoes and reminds us of the times we have felt that way as well. And so we have to build resilience in the same way that we're trying to build it for the people we're working with, and in the sense that we have to practice having positive experiences. We have to practice having these positive interactions, and we have to practice feeling happy. Not just like thinking about it in the future, but actually doing things that make us feel relaxed, make us feel happy, make us feel connected in good ways, because that is what's building those pathways in our brains to help us be healthier and have healthier connections as well. So overall, all of this is a lot of information to take in. I recognize, and it takes a while to digest, but I really think, like, when we're talking about being trauma informed, we're talking about what do we do with this information, we just really have to emphasize for people that, and acknowledge for people that trauma is a big deal, that trauma is all around us. It is happening in lots of different ways through lots of different experiences. We have to acknowledge our own trauma during this season as well, and how it's affecting us, how it's affecting our work with our clients. Recognizing that trauma can look different for different people, and taking stock of what you think your symptoms are of trauma, what helping our clients take stock of their own symptoms, and connecting their symptoms and their responses to that it is a trauma response is an important thing. We have to take this information and do something useful with it. We have to be advocates for systemic change, for cultural change, for institutional change and reform. And it's easy to start with ourselves. How are we working in our own practices? The agencies or the organizations that we work for, really taking a look at saying, are we incorporating the knowledge of trauma? Do the practices that we have, the way we meet with clients, the procedures that we have them go through when they're doing an intake and when they're, receiving services from us, do they really acknowledge what kinds of trauma they've been through and how they're dealing with it? A very simple example is an organization I worked for a long time ago had a 3 no-show policy. And I get that no-show policies are pretty, they're good. It helps clients know that you can't just not show up for your appointments and expect to still receive services. Like that's part of it. But also recognizing that when the primary population that we work with has PTSD, and avoidance is a key part of PTSD, avoidance means they're not going to show up to their appointments sometimes. And so we kind of decided to take a look at, well, what does our no-show policy look like? And how can we make this a little more accommodating for, for our people who have PTSD? And that's just a very small example, but I think all kinds of advocacy within our organizations. There's, a ton of discussion about police reforms and addressing just systemic and institutional racism that has just been going on for so long, that we have to address those things. That's what being trauma informed means, is that we have to integrate knowledge of it and we have to do something about it. We have to help make our culture, our agencies, our organizations better because we have this knowledge now. And then lastly, just seeking to avoid re-traumatizing people through our interactions, through the things that, you know, we're doing with them. Again, like I mentioned a minute ago, like talking about issues of racism, if there's any sort of like interracial, or even if it's not interracial, but just addressing issues of racial bias and discrimination, because ignoring it for some people can be re-traumatizing. It's like, you know, oh look, you know, she is again ignoring, you know, the wounds that I have felt as a person of color. So if we're not ignoring it, I mean, if we are ignoring it, it can be re-traumatizing to people. So I think that's just that's an example of something that we can do to try to avoid that as well. And I think we do our best to avoid re-traumatizing people, but we know that we don't know everyone's triggers. We don't know the things that set everyone off, but again, we're doing our best to try and be better and take this information and to make it useful. That was a lot of information. Thank you guys for hanging with me throughout this afternoon. But if there are any last couple of questions, I'd be happy to hang on for a little bit longer to address those questions. If there are certain things that you want to you know, send directly to me or address directly to me, my email is listed on here that you can send that as well. And I will be making sure that Gabriella has this PowerPoint to be able to send out to all the participants, and the grounding handout as well. So thank you again for the opportunity to share with you today, and hope it's been helpful.
Hey everyone, this is Gabriella with NC CASA. Thank you, Amanda, so much for being here and for presenting that information to us. For those of you who didn't fill out the form, if you would like the presentation and the recording of the webinar, if you could please fill that out before you leave today. And I will be sending all of you that information later on today once I have the recording of this webinar up on our YouTube page. Erica, do you have anything that you want to say before we head out?
Nope, Gabriella, thank you. I think we've covered it all. Thank you everyone for being here, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Bye everyone.